My wife handed me divorce papers right after she inherited over $12 million and told me to leave the home we built together. Welcome to Amelia's Stories. Here we share real stories filled with love, betrayal, and lessons that stay with you long after. If you're new here, tell me where you're from in the comments and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories you won't forget. Daniel, 38, was the kind of man people respected. An HVAC technician who worked long hours, he carried himself with quiet pride, always making sure his wife Emily had everything she needed. Emily, 36, worked hard to become a nurse practitioner, and through their 12 years of marriage, Daniel stood by her side, supporting her through late nights, tuition bills, and sacrifices that drained him but never broke him. They built a modest life in a small Ohio suburb. It wasn't perfect, but Daniel believed it was built on love and teamwork. That belief crumbled the day Emily's wealthy uncle passed, leaving her a fortune, $12.4 million. Daniel saw hope in that inheritance. The forever home they always dreamed of, financial security, maybe private school for their future children. For him it was the reward for years of sacrifice. But Emily had other plans. Sitting across the dining table, her face cold, she slid a folder toward him. Divorce papers. Her words cut deep. You need to leave. This house is mine now. In that instant Daniel's world collapsed. Daniel sat frozen, the papers still burning in his hands. For 12 years he thought he knew the woman across the table, but now her voice was ice. This isn't working anymore. I want freedom, she said, not even looking at him as if he were already gone. He tried to ask why, to bring up counseling, to remind her of everything they had pushed through together. But she shut him down with short, sharp replies. There was no warmth in her tone, no opening for hope. She had already decided. Daniel's mind spun. Freedom? From what? He wasn't perfect, but he had worked himself to exhaustion to give them stability. His gut twisted as another thought crept in. Was there someone else? He asked her directly, heart pounding, but Emily shook her head without hesitation. Her denial sounded too quick, too clean. He couldn't tell if it was the truth or just another layer of betrayal. That night, Daniel stood in their bedroom, stuffing clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands. The house felt unfamiliar, like it no longer belonged to him. Every picture frame, every corner mocked the life he thought they had built together. He drove to his brother Mark's small place across town. Mark didn't ask questions, just handed him a pillow and pointed to the guest room. Daniel lay awake in the dark, humiliated and hollow, Emily's words echoing in his head on a cruel loop. His marriage hadn't just cracked, it had shattered. It didn't take long before Daniel started noticing the cracks widening. Even from Mark's guest room, little details about Emily kept reaching him. A friend mentioned seeing her at the mall with bags from high-end stores, clothes far pricier than anything she used to buy. Then came the perfume. A bold, floral scent Daniel had never known her to wear, clinging faintly when he stopped by to collect the last of his things. One evening, while Daniel stood outside the old house debating if he should knock, their elderly neighbor Mrs. Collins shuffled over. In her soft, cautious voice, she said she had seen a new man visiting regularly, often staying late into the night. The words cut deeper than any lawyer's letter ever could. Suspicion hardened into determination. Daniel started quietly digging. Through a mutual friend and a few well-placed questions, he uncovered the truth. The man's name was Ryan, 40 years old, a financial advisor who had been guiding Emily through the process of handling her inheritance. Their meetings had started out strictly professional, but it was clear now they had turned into something much more personal. Piece by piece the puzzle came together. Emily hadn't suddenly changed her mind about their marriage after the money came in. She had been setting this up for months. The inheritance hadn't caused her betrayal. It had given her the perfect excuse to leave. For Daniel, the realization was crushing. The woman he sacrificed everything for had been planning his replacement all along. Daniel had never felt emptier. It wasn't just losing Emily. It was losing the home they built together, the walls that once held laughter and late-night talks. Now it belonged to someone else and he was left behind. One night, unable to sleep, he drove past the old neighborhood. The glow from the living room window stabbed at him like a knife. Parked neatly in the driveway was Ryan's car, sitting in the very spot Daniel used to pull into after long shifts. He didn't stop. He just kept driving, jaw clenched, his chest hollow. What stung more than anything were Emily's bold posts online. Pictures of her smiling with wine glasses, captions about new beginnings and freedom. She showed no shame, no hint of guilt for tearing apart 12 years of marriage. Meanwhile, Daniel's life felt like it was collapsing in slow motion. Bills piled up, legal fees he could barely keep up with, debts from years of covering their expenses. He was stuck in his brother Mark's cramped guest room, clothes shoved into a corner with barely enough space to breathe. Every night his mind replayed the past, the double shifts he worked so she could finish school, the vacations he skipped, telling himself they'd go later when things were better, the side jobs he took just to keep them afloat, and for what? To be thrown aside like garbage the second she had money and someone else to share it with. Daniel was broken and it felt like the world didn't care. Daniel had reached the point where despair turned into something else. Resolve. Tired of feeling powerless, he scheduled a meeting with Attorney Williams, a seasoned divorce lawyer known for being relentless in court. Sitting across the polished desk, Daniel poured out his story, every betrayal, every sacrifice. Williams listened carefully, then leaned forward with a calm confidence that Daniel hadn't felt in months. "She can't just throw you out with nothing," the lawyer explained. "Inheritance may be hers, but the marriage has legal weight. You're entitled to spousal support, division of assets, and a fair share of what you built together." The words lit a spark inside Daniel. For the first time he could see a path where he wasn't simply the victim. Over the next weeks he worked quietly, methodically. He dug through old bank statements, pulling out records of the tuition payments he covered while Emily studied. He gathered receipts from the side jobs he took to keep their household running. He even saved text messages where Emily had promised they'd build a future together once she made it. Each piece of paper became more than just evidence. It became a reminder that he hadn't been worthless, that her success was built on his back. Daniel kept his plan close, telling no one, not even Mark. If Emily wanted to betray him, fine. But he would not roll over and let her walk away unscathed. Quietly he made a decision: he would fight back. The first sign of Emily's arrogance came in the form of a neatly bound agreement sent through her lawyer. It was labeled as a quick divorce, offering Daniel a pitiful payout that barely covered a few months of rent. The message was clear: take this and disappear. She expected him to fold, just like she always assumed he would. But this time Daniel didn't sign. With Attorney Williams guiding him, he pushed back. A request for full financial disclosure was filed, forcing Emily to open her records, accounts, and assets to scrutiny. The move stunned her. What she thought would be a clean break turned into a drawn-out battle. When the first court date arrived, Emily strutted in, Ryan at her side. Their smug smiles said they had already won. Daniel felt their eyes on him, waiting for him to look small, defeated. But he didn't. Dressed in a simple suit, sitting tall beside his lawyer, he stayed calm. Inside the courtroom the tone shifted. Williams argued with precision, pushing back against Emily's attempt to minimize Daniel's contributions. Every time her lawyer tried to brush aside the past, Daniel's attorney brought the focus back. Emily's confidence wavered as the judge took note. She had expected Daniel to disappear quietly, not fight with steady determination. For the first time since this nightmare began, Daniel felt something new: control. The balance of power was no longer in her hands. It was shifting, and she knew it. The courtroom grew tense as Attorney Williams laid out the evidence piece by piece. First came the phone records, late-night calls between Emily and Ryan that began months before the divorce papers were served. Then came the statements from neighbors who had seen Ryan's car parked in Daniel's driveway, often overnight. Each fact chipped away at the image Emily tried so hard to maintain. Emily sat stiffly, her expression calm but her hands fidgeting. When questioned, she claimed the calls were professional, and that Ryan was simply guiding her through financial decisions. But the evidence painted a different story. The so-called professional meetings stretched past midnight, and eyewitness accounts matched perfectly with the timeline. Williams didn't stop there. He highlighted Daniel's years of sacrifice, working extra hours, paying her tuition, and supporting her career while putting his own comfort aside. He painted the picture of a man who gave everything, only to be discarded once Emily had wealth and another man. Emily's earlier narrative, that their marriage was loveless and already broken, collapsed under the weight of proof. The judge, stern and observant, made it clear Daniel's role in the marriage mattered. The ruling followed. Emily would keep her inheritance, money left directly to her. But Daniel was granted spousal support and a rightful share of the marital assets, including half the value of their home. Daniel didn't walk away with millions, but he refused to leave empty-handed. For the first time, justice felt real. The courtroom air turned heavy when Emily finally lost control. As Daniel's lawyer calmly presented the judge's ruling, she slammed her hand against the table and stood up, her voice shaking with rage. "He's nothing but a parasite living off my money," she shouted, pointing at Daniel as if he were a criminal. Gasps rippled through the room. The outburst shocked even her own attorney, who scrambled to calm her down. But the damage was already done. The judge's eyes narrowed, unimpressed with her lack of composure. Where Daniel had stayed steady, Emily now looked erratic and unhinged. Ryan, sitting at the back of the courtroom, shifted uncomfortably. The smug confidence he once carried seemed to fade. He avoided meeting her gaze, and when the hearing adjourned, he slipped out quietly, not waiting for her. That small act spoke louder than words. He wanted distance from the chaos she had created. Back in their town, the whispers began. Neighbors who once congratulated her on her new chapter now traded gossip about her behavior in court. Colleagues at the hospital noticed the cracks in her polished mask. Side glances, hushed conversations, and quiet judgment followed her wherever she went. The carefully curated image of a woman who had stepped into wealth and freedom began to unravel. She wanted everyone to see her as powerful, independent, untouchable. But after her very public meltdown, Emily was no longer admired. She was pitted and, worse, avoided. Her perfect new life was crumbling. Daniel finally held the settlement check in his hands, not a fortune but enough to start over. He chose a small but cozy house on the edge of town. Nothing flashy, just a place that felt his own. For the first time in months, he unlocked a door that truly belonged to him, a symbol of freedom instead of loss. Slowly he began piecing himself back together. Old friends who had drifted away during the chaos of his marriage reached out again. He accepted invitations for coffee, joined weekend barbecues, and laughed in ways he hadn't since before everything fell apart. With every conversation, his confidence returned, no longer the man crushed under betrayal but someone rebuilding a life on his terms. That was when he met Sarah. She was 35, a schoolteacher with a warm smile and a calm presence that instantly put him at ease. She wasn't flashy, didn't carry drama, and never treated him like a burden. She simply listened, shared her own stories, and reminded him what kindness looked like. Meanwhile, Emily's world was unraveling. Ryan had slipped away quietly. The whispers around town grew louder, and her once perfect image shattered. She had money but no love, no respect, no peace. One quiet evening, Emily drove past Daniel's new home. She slowed when she saw him on the porch, laughing freely with Sarah by his side. For her it was a bitter sight. For Daniel it was proof he had truly moved on. The final hearing brought everything to a close. The divorce was officially finalized, and the judge's ruling was clear. Daniel would receive spousal support for 5 years along with his share of the marital assets. It wasn't the fortune Emily guarded so tightly, but it was justice, and it gave him the foundation to live freely without fear. As the ruling was read, Emily's face twisted with fury. Her glare could have burned a hole through him, but Daniel didn't flinch. He gathered his papers, stood tall, and allowed himself the smallest of smiles. Not smug, not loud. Just a quiet recognition that he had survived the storm she tried to bury him under. Emily remained seated, fists clenched, surrounded by wealth but with no one at her side. Ryan was long gone, her reputation stained, and the friends who once celebrated her new beginning had disappeared. She had everything she thought she wanted, millions in the bank, a sprawling house, but it echoed with emptiness. Daniel walked out of the courthouse with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. He didn't need to argue with her anymore. He didn't need revenge in the form of screaming or bitterness. His life was his again, and that was victory enough. Emily returned to her mansion, sitting alone in silence. Daniel returned to his modest home, laughter waiting for him. Amelia's closing line: "Money can buy comfort, but it cannot erase betrayal. And sometimes the sweetest revenge is moving on stronger than before."